I'm Mikey Evans, and this is the Oakland County News. Marijuana use per se, not a gateway to illicit drug use, study says. December 7, 2006, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Adolescent marijuana use is not a reliable predictor of later substance abuse, according to a clinical trial data published this month in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Investigators at the University of Pittsburgh School of Pharmacy tracked the drug use patterns of 214 boys, beginning at ages 10 to 12, for a period of up to 12 years. All of the subjects eventually used either legal or illegal drugs. Researchers found that adolescents who used marijuana prior to using other drugs, including alcohol and tobacco, were no more likely to develop a substance abuse disorder than other subjects in the study. The study's findings call into question the long-held belief that has shaped prevention efforts and governmental policy for 6 decades, researchers declared in the press release. Investigators said that environmental factors, such as exposure to illegal drugs in their neighborhoods, as well as subjects' proneness to deviancy, were the 2 characteristics that most commonly predicted substance abuse. This evidence supports what's known as a common liability model, which states that the likelihood that someone will transition to the use of illegal drugs is determined not by the preceding use of a particular drug, but instead by the user's individual tendencies and environmental circumstances. Investigators stated in a press release, the emphasis on the drugs themselves, rather than other more important factors that shape a person's behavior, has been detrimental to drug policy and prevention programs. A 1999 review by U.S. National Academy of Sciences Institute of Medicine also disputed the hypothesis that cannabis use is a stepping stone to other illicit drug use, including that pot is not a gateway drug to the extent that it is a cause or even that it is the most significant predictor of serious drug abuse. Mexico sends 6,500 federal forces to tackle drug violence. Jan Grillo, Associated Press. Venta de Bravo, Mexico. Mexico's new president launched his first major offensive against drug gangs, sending more than 6,500 federal forces to his violence-plagued home state, cracking down on turf wars that have left hundreds dead in a wave of execution-style killings and beheadings. Security officials said police and soldiers will arrest traffickers, mount checkpoints, and burn marijuana and opium poppies grown in Michoacan's rugged mountains. Navy ships will seal off the state's short Pacific coast, which smugglers travel on their way to the United States. President Felipe Calderon took office on December 1st, pledging a battle against crime, promising more funds for the Army and law enforcement, and appointing hardline Interior Minister Francisco Ramirez Acuna to oversee the fight against organized crime. Mr. Calderon vowed to smash the drug gangs, which have been blamed for more than 2,000 drug-related killings this year, including several police chiefs, journalists, town mayors, and at least one judge. The battle against organized crime has just begun, Mr. Ramirez Acuna said Monday. We are looking to take back the spaces that organized crime has seized. The force of 4,260 soldiers, 1,054 sailors, 1,420 federal agents, and 50 specialized investigative federal agents will operate 19 planes, 38 helicopters, and 4 ships in Michoacan. Similar past efforts have shown few permanent results. Mr. Calderon's predecessor Vicente Fox promised the mother of all battles against organized crime, sending thousands of soldiers and police to places like the border city of Nuevo Laredo and the tourist city of Acapulco. Those efforts failed to quell the violence for long. Hilly, largely rural Michoacan, which has about 4 million people, is a major drug transshipment point. Police here have reported more than 500 killings this year, about half which investigators say are linked to the turf war between 2 rival drug gangs. To silence its rivals and the public, the Michoacan gangs have carried out a wave of decapitations, placing the severed heads on public display with threatening notes, including one which read, "See, hear, shut up if you want to stay alive." In the most gruesome case, gunmen burst into a nightclub and rolled 5 heads onto the dance floor. In another, a pair of heads were planted in front of a car dealership in Zitácuaro, a town best known until now as a nesting ground for monarch butterflies. Federal investigators say the violence in Michoacan stems from a turf war between local gang called Los Valencia, apparently allied with Guzman's Sinaloa cartel, and a shadowy group known as La Familia, apparently allied with the Gulf cartel. The group operates a bloody gang of enforcers known as the Zetas, led by an ex-Mexican army operatives turned hitmen. Mr. Calderon, a career politician from the Conservative National Action Party, has come under criticism for his proposed budget cuts in other areas, and the leftist Democratic Revolution Party, or PRD, still refuses to recognize Mr. Calderon's narrow July 2nd electoral victory over the PRD candidate. But Michoacan Governor Lázaro Cárdenas Batel, a PRD member, welcomed Monday's announcement and said he hoped the federal forces would stay. "We hope it won't be a fleeting presence, that it will be a presence that will seriously reduce the level of violence in Michoacan," Cárdenas Batel told local media. The state's killing rose in 2004 following the arrest of Valencia leader Armando Valencia and his lieutenant Carlos Mendoza. Investigators say their arrests encouraged Gulf cartel leaders to try to battle their way into their territory. While Mexico has made some headway in arresting the heads of Tijuana and Gulf cartels, major traffickers remain at large, and the drug gangs have regrouped and formed nationwide alliances that fight each other for control of local markets and drug shipment routes. Many security experts say it will take more than just brute force to defeat the cartels, who are heavily armed, using rocket-propelled grenades and bazookas, and well-financed, making billions of dollars smuggling marijuana, heroin, methamphetamine, and cocaine into the United States. Detroit Free Press. More heroin seen, and Oakland County Police report increase. December 8, 2006, by John Wisely. Police cases involving heroin use are up 50% in the past 11 months in Oakland County, and the users are often as young as high schoolers, Sheriff Michael Bouchard said Thursday. Doses as cheap as $10, combined with the young age of users, are fueling a dangerous trend that Bouchard says has resulted in increased overdoses, and parents need to be aware. Snorting and smoking heroin also have brought the drug to people afraid to inject it with a needle. "We're seeing young, bright kids say, 'I'll try this,'" Bouchard said. Heroin cases are still few compared to marijuana and cocaine. There were about 20 cases last year, and more than 30 so far this year, but heroin's ability to kill, particularly when combined with other drugs, makes it a growing concern, Bouchard said. In Wayne County, 110 people died from overdoses involving another drug, fentanyl, between September 2005 and June 2006, according to Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office. Many of those victims were using heroin laced with fentanyl. Some community activists say reduced drug prevention efforts are adding to the problem. Countywide numbers on drug overdoses aren't available, but Royal Oak has logged more than 130 this year, Bouchard said. An editorial opinion from the Seattle Times, Monday, December 11th. Neil Pierce, syndicated columnist. The other war we can't win. Pick your week or month. The evidence keeps rolling in to show this country's vaunted war on drugs is as destructively misguided as our cataclysmic error in invading Iraq. There are 2.2 million Americans behind bars, another 5 million on probation or parole, Justice Department reported on November 30th. We exceed Russia and Cuba in incarcerations per 100,000 people. In fact, no other nation comes close. The biggest single question for the expanding numbers? Our war on drugs. A quarter of all sentences are for drug offenses, mostly non-violent. So has the war worked? Has drug use or addiction declined? Clearly not. Hard street drugs are reportedly cheaper and purer and as easy to get as when President Richard Nixon declared substance abuse a national emergency. Drugs crossing our borders have been widely blamed. To stem them, President Bill Clinton launched Plan Colombia, carried on enthusiastically under the Bush administration. The plan's modus operandi is war from the sky, aerial spraying that has covered 2.4 million acres of Colombia's coca plant and opium poppy fields, almost as much territory as Rhode Island and Delaware combined. The U.S. Embassy in Bogota has become our second largest diplomatic mission, employing more than 2,000 people. Still, the UN reports, Colombia last year produced 776 metric tons of cocaine, enough to supply 80% of the world market. That's a great victory. In Afghanistan, the provider of a huge portion of the world's heroin, Production is soaring with the profits funding insurgents and criminals. Drug cartels with their own armies regularly engage NATO forces, as serious a threat as the Taliban. High-level government officials and police are reportedly corrupted, and the U.S. still presses eradication programs that alienate villagers. And Mexico? Under Vicente Fox's presidency, Mexico captured several drug gang leaders, seized record amounts of drugs, and extradited about 50 suspected traffickers to the U.S. Our government is said to be pleased, except that gang-sparked gunfights, kidnappings, and murders have escalated along the U.S.-Mexico border. A vast majority of cocaine entering the U.S., plus increasing amounts of marijuana and methamphetamine, continues to flow through Mexico. We'd be incredibly better off if we had treated drugs as a public health issue instead of a criminal issue. As the celebrated Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman in fact advised us. Friedman, who died last month at 94, witnessed America's misadventure into alcohol prohibition in his youth. We have the spectacle of Al Capone, of the hijackings, the gang wars, wrote Friedman. He decried turning users into criminals. Prohibition is an attempted cure that makes matters worse, for both the addict and the rest of us. And in one of his last interviews, Friedman was asked the relevant questions. Should we allow the killing to go on in the ghettos? 10,000 additional murders a year? Should we continue to destroy Colombia and Afghanistan? The ironic truth is that humans have used drugs, psychoactive substances ranging from opium and coca to alcohol, hemp, tobacco, and coffee since the dawn of history. Problems get triggered when the substances are associated with despised or feared subgroups, according to a careful study by the King County, Washington Bar Association. Tobacco users returning to Spain from the Americas in the 16th century, for example, were subject to tortures of the Inquisition because they smoked like savages. Coffee houses were politically suspect in 17th century Eastern Europe, with users subject to the death penalty. In this country, opium was widely applied medically up until the 1900s, but then became associated with opium dens operated by Chinese immigrants. Cocaine, used by oppressed southern field hands to allay their pains, became associated with Negroes. The same Puritanism and misplaced religious zeal that triggered prohibition of alcohol was gradually applied to more and more substances from the early 1900s onward, culminating in our ugly and now global drug war. Race remains a disturbing factor. The federal penalty for crack cocaine, favored in poor black neighborhoods, remains 10 times that for regular cocaine, more popular among whites. Yet just think, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson cultivated hemp for pain relief. President William McKinley entertained with coca wine. Coca-Cola contained small amounts of coca and caffeine until the coca was removed in 1903. The United States professes values of freedom, tolerance, and love for peace. Yet now, in its drug laws, its wholesale incarceration practices, and increasingly in its international drug practices, this country lurches in a polar opposite direction. The United States has less than 5% of the world's population, yet we have 25% of the world's prison population. How is this the land of freedom? Thank you, and this has been Mikey Evans for the Oakland County News.